Welcome, everyone. My name is Colin Leyden, the Texas State Director with EDF Action, the advocacy partner of the Environmental Defense Fund. At EDF, we're building consensus and enthusiasm for clean energy and climate action. We want Texas to remain an energy leader as our state and the world economies move towards a clean energy future. And today we're going to talk a bit about how the money and resources from the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law can help accelerate this transition. I want to thank all of you for joining. Congressman Allred and Lori Clark, we appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedules to help Texans and our EDF members understand the opportunities and maybe some of the challenges as this important federal funding becomes available. First, we'll hear from Congressman Colin Allred, elected in 2018 to represent parts of Dallas and the fast-growing communities of Collin County. Congressman Allred is a leader on issues related to national security, Veteran Affairs, and Transportation. As a member of the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, he played a key role in developing and securing support for the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law passed last year. Second, we'll hear from Lori Clark. Lori is part of the North Central Texas Council of Governments and serves on the Dallas-Fort Worth Clean Cities Coalition. She's an expert on providing local support and education related to clean, next-generation transportation, including electric vehicles. There's a lot of different kinds of funding in the infrastructure law, money for roads and bridges, expanding broadband access, and other important needs. But there's also quite a bit of resources in the law to accelerate progress on climate and clean energy. And that's what we're going to talk about today. One logistical note for members of the press, if you have a question, please write your name and the media outlet you represent in the comment section, and we're going to try to get to them throughout. And before we jump into a discussion, I'd love to invite both of our panelists to share a few remarks. We'll start with you, Congressman Allred. Welcome.
Okay, well, thanks, Colin, and I'm really happy to be on here with Lori and to discuss the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, because I do think that, as you said, Colin, some of the benefits of it are not yet fully understood. And this has been a priority for me to pass a bill like this since I was elected in 2018, and I'm really glad that under President Biden's leadership and with efforts of folks like me in the Congress that we did get it done. And I really want to say that this is a big deal, and I really think we should be proud of it. It's a truly historic investment in our infrastructure, particularly for us here in North Texas, where I'm from, but also across the state of Texas. When we're talking about the environment, transportation accounts for 29% of our greenhouse gas emissions. And this law is going to allow us to take some huge steps to make our transportation sector a lot cleaner. And I really think that we'll be seeing the benefits of this package, not just only over the next 5 years when most of the investments will be made, but really over the next generation. And before we get into the questions, I just want to talk about why this is a big deal, especially for our environment. The bill includes things like electric vehicle infrastructure funding. It's advancing President Biden's goal to expand the U.S. network to 500,000 electric vehicle chargers and to grow electric vehicle sales to 50% of the automobile market by 2030. And I announced this month that $60 million is headed to Texas this year, and $400 million over the next 5 years is coming to Texas, the most of any state for us to build out our electric vehicle charging infrastructure. And these funds will help us build a reliable network of stations across the state, paving the way for cleaner options for Texas drivers and, really importantly, create good paying jobs. And I look forward to working with our local and state leaders like Lori to put this money to work. And, this is a huge step towards positioning Texas and our nation to lead the world on electric vehicles. And with new charging stations, Texans will have more options to charge their vehicles. We know we're a big state. We need to have those options. And I previously announced over $61 million in funding for our transit agencies. Here in North Texas, as we continue to grow incredibly rapidly, we have to make more transportation options available to folks and improve the existing ones. And these funds are going to allow us to do just that by investing in our public transit systems like DART. The mass transit funding alone will invest $32 million in flexible funding for the Dallas region to help our communities transit safer and more efficient, and funding for new buses and rail cars and track and station repairs, $23 million for the Dallas region to ensure our transit systems are in a state of good repair, over $3 million statewide to upgrade our bus fleets and repair older buses and bus facilities, $2 million for the Dallas region to transit for seniors and persons with disabilities, and that's just this year. And so additionally, the law allocated $5 billion over 5 years to help communities purchase electric school buses, which is really, I think, a big deal as well. More than 25 million kids ride the bus to school each day, and some of them are, breathing polluted air from diesel school buses. I know I certainly was and did. And I don't know about y'all, but I remember, the buses that I rode on and the kind of black smoke that they belched. And I can't imagine, exactly how dirty they were. But now we have an opportunity to change that with thousands of cleaner school buses in every community in America. And in addition to cleaner, more sustainable transportation options, the infrastructure law is helping us to cap abandoned oil wells across Texas, which is a big deal as well. We're set to get $107 million in funds this year to identify, clean up, and plug orphaned oil wells across the state of Texas. Not only will all of these policies work to help us reduce emissions, but they're going to reduce congestion. They'll help us take cars off the road in some cases, and they'll grow our economy. And as I said, maybe most importantly, along with the environmental impact, help us create new good jobs. And I'm really excited because nearly every week I've been announcing a new round of funding from this law. And as more and more investments become available to Texas, including competitive grants that we can compete for, I will do all I can to make sure that Texas leads the way, and that we'll keep working with groups like EDF, as well as local leaders, to make sure that we do this in a way that really fits our communities, and that's good for our environment, good for our economy. So I look forward to talking with you more about what the legislation means for Texas, but I really think there's a lot in this bill for us to be proud about it and to look forward to, especially as Texans. It's going to set us on a good path.
Thank you, Congressman. Can't wait till we get to the questions. Lori, want to hand it over to you to describe your role and your thoughts on it.
Sure. Thank you so much. And it's an honor to be here this morning with you, Congressman Allred, and thank you, Colin, for the invitation. So I want to just explain a little bit about who we are, because we're one of those agencies that impacts a lot of people and nobody's heard of. So we're the North Central Texas Council of Governments, and we are an agency of, by, and for the local governments across the Dallas-Fort Worth region. So that means that we work with our cities, our counties, transit agencies, as Congressman Allred mentioned, have a big role to play in the infrastructure bill as well. And we work on all those issues that cross jurisdictional boundaries. So things like solid waste and emergency response, and transportation is the department that I'm in. And we actually do our air quality work in the transportation department. And the Congressman mentioned that the infrastructure bill is going to do a lot for climate. We also still locally have an ozone air pollution problem. And most of that ozone air pollution is attributed to the transportation sector. So one of the best things that we can do to improve our local air quality is to transition to cleaner vehicles. And now that we've got commercially available, affordable, increasingly affordable, there's still work to do there, zero emission electric vehicles, we want to push to zero as much as we can. We do support a variety of fuel types. We service the Dallas-Fort Worth Clean Cities Coalition. We're designated by the Department of Energy to serve that role, and we're housed within the COG. So we support local fleets, and then also consumers in understanding what the options are for them and what they need to make sure that they understand to be successful in making that transition. So we are excited to collaborate with Texas Department of Transportation, all of that money that's coming to them. I was actually just in a meeting with them this morning, just before this, on what that electric vehicle formula program money means for them. Also working to help our local governments understand the options that they have with the competitive funding that's going to be coming for electric vehicle charging infrastructure, so that we can be prepared as a region to take advantage of that money, whether that's us as an agency submitting an application or supporting applications from others in our region. And then on the school bus money, helping our school districts who have a lot of questions, and they really have a lot to learn about electric school buses, to be prepared to make that transition. So we actually held a meeting on that last week. So excited to talk more.
Thanks so much, Lori. I'm going to ask a couple questions that I kind of came up with on my own. And I'll start with you, Congressman Allred. So one of the common problems that face a lot of Texas drivers or drivers who are maybe considering an EV is what's known as range anxiety, the feeling that there might not be a charging station when they need it. And it would prevent them from getting from point A to point B. And I know that, your role on the Committee of Transportation and Infrastructure, you helped secure some of this funding for electric EV charging stations along our roads and highways. And as you mentioned, we're getting more than any other state, $60 million just this year. Could you talk about your role in doing that and why a network of charging stations is particularly important for Texas?
Yeah. Well, I think it's really interesting watching, as a lot of Texans did, the Super Bowl and seeing the number of electric vehicle ads on there. This is where our auto industry is going. This is also where the global auto industry is going. We have Toyota headquartered just outside of my district here in North Texas. This is where they're going, and this is also, I think, being driven by demand from the consumers. What has not been there, of course, as we all know, I know driving around Dallas right now, is the network of electric vehicle charging stations to really, I think, match the buyer and where the market is heading. And so this is something that, we felt very strongly needed to have a serious investment, both immediately and over time, to build this out. And so, absolutely you're right. For Texans, range anxiety, as you said, I think is exactly the right word, because we got a lot of range. And we're used to our kind of network of gas stations and all of that, but we just have not, I think, really conceptualized how to make that change on the electric vehicle side. And that's what this money is going to spur and allow us to do. And I'm glad to hear that Lori's already at work on this. And, the question for us as a state is making sure we use this money correctly, because we are getting the most of any state, $400 million over 5 years for electric vehicle charging stations. That's a big deal. We're also, of course, a very big state, so we need to use this well, implement it well, and I hope that we will. But as I said, I think this is where sort of the market is going to. And so a lot of times when we have discussions in the past about electric vehicles, it seems like we're trying to get ahead maybe of where consumers are, get ahead of where the market is. I think this is exactly moving in lockstep with where consumers are, with where the market is going, is that as these vehicles are coming online, as Lori said, becoming less expensive, and we have work to do there. And in the Build Back Better bill, we did have some incentives for electric vehicles that I hope we can still get passed. But as we move towards that, we need to have the charging station infrastructure, or it'll slow down the market change and we'll actually be lagging behind the market. And we really don't want to see that happen.
Thank you. One of the comparisons I've seen around on this is, when we started to move towards the automobile, the U.S. government invested an enormous amount in building out our highways. Same with trains and all that. So really kind of a complementary infrastructure investment here from the U.S. government, something we do all the time.
Yes, it is.
Lori, I wanted to throw one question your way. You mentioned electric school buses, and I know you've had some conversation with school districts. So can you talk a little bit about what's happening in the Dallas-Fort Worth area around electric school buses? And what are the opportunities with this federal funding? And then, I think you mentioned, what are the challenges?
Sure. So I'm very happy to report that there are electric school buses in operation in the state of Texas, and it's happening right here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. A very small school district called Everman ISD on the south side of Fort Worth was the first district in the state to receive electric buses. So there's 3. They've been running for close to a year and a half now, and by all accounts, they're very happy with them, and they're very eager to showcase them when they're not out on route transporting students. So there's a lot that Everman has been very open and being willing to share with their peer districts. And that's really what it's going to take, is a lot of education. We had a meeting recently and I asked, there's 3 big issues. There's the money, being able to afford the transition. There's the vehicles and making sure you understand them. There's the infrastructure and making sure you are well planned in that area. Which of those 3 is the biggest hurdle? And all the districts said all of them. So there's just so much that they just feel that they don't understand. Plugging in an electric bus to the electric grid just requires an entirely different set of planning and a different set of understanding than just having a fuel tank that just has a dispenser that fills up a bus. There's a lot more implications in terms of the overall facility and billing and utility planning. And what's really important and what's really great about our region is the utilities are ready to be a solution and ready to be part of making these projects successful. Their biggest concern is just making sure that they are aware of the projects well enough in advance to be able to do that planning with the school district. So we're here to help make those connections, to make those introductions and facilitate the conversations. But there's a lot of excitement and there's interest. There's just a lot of learning that needs to happen first.
Yeah, I've heard similar things too, around that some of the districts are, they don't necessarily have someone on staff that's tasked with kind of putting all this together. So it's great that there's agencies and organizations like yourself that can help facilitate that, because that'll be really important. Congressman, I have another question for you. This one's a little bit more of a bigger picture question. Climate and energy can be a challenging conversation in the state of Texas with lots of different competing energy interests. Kind of curious, how do you think about talking about climate and energy, when you're talking to constituents here in Texas, and sort of how do you go about thinking about that?
Yeah. Well, first of all, we are an energy state. And I think we should remain one. We can just lead the green energy revolution the way we've led other, energy movements. And I think we're already the state with the most wind power, for example, of any state in the country. We have unlimited solar capacity, and I think we're increasingly seeing. I've spoken with some solar pop-ups that are trying to move more aggressively there. Here in my home in Dallas right now, I have the option through my energy company of choosing clean energy for my bill, and that's what we do. And that's an option that we have here. So we're already moving in this direction. But we also know that we've had an incredible cost from climate change already in the state of Texas and across the country, and that it's already with us, and that we're already dealing with it. And as President Biden has said, this is a blinking red light, for our country, for the world. And so we do have to, address this. But, I think it doesn't have to be any kind of a conversation about this. Has to also be about the jobs that we're going to create, the jobs that are there, and the ability for us, to lead the way. So when I talk about the impacts that we've already experienced, I often reference Hurricane Harvey, which, was a storm that was worsened by, the Gulf of Mexico being a degree or two warmer than it should be. And so, 100-year floods are not 100-year floods for us anymore. 100-year storms are not 100-year storms for us anymore. They're much more regular. And, the cost of recovering from these crises is enormous. But Texas, I think has a really important role to play in saying, look at the way we've already diversified our electric grid, through basically industry moving that way. Some actually, smart decisions from our state legislature, which I can't say are always making decisions that I agree with in the past that were made, to move into wind energy, and that we can continue to lead in this area, and that it can be about us creating jobs, about leading the next round of energy in the country, around the world. That this is something that our energy companies themselves are also investing heavily in and are looking themselves to move into, and that in many ways we just have to catch up with where everyone else is in terms of the discussion here. So, I don't think it's something that we should be afraid of. I think we should embrace it, and we should understand that we can lead it, and that we're already well positioned to do that.
You made an excellent point about Texas already leading the nation in wind energy, and I was looking at the power grid queue for new development around power generation in Texas, and it's just stacked with solar applications for new solar generation. We will soon lead the world, the U.S. in solar installation as well, and then also on battery storage to help even out that renewable energy that we have. So, really important points there. Lori, wanted to get back to you with another question. You mentioned there, we've got this money that's come in specifically for charging infrastructure. That's the $400 million the congressman mentioned over 5 years. But there's also another significant funding opportunity for competitive grant applications. And that I believe that's part of what the school bus money is for, or as part of that. What are you thinking of in addition to school buses, which would be incredibly great? And I know a lot of parents and future parents are excited about that. But what are some of the other prime opportunities for Texas or the DFW area when thinking about that competitive grant program that's going to be coming out as well?
Yes, there are a lot of competitive grant programs. I will say, in my opinion, the most challenging thing about the infrastructure law is keeping up with how many different opportunities there are in it and making sure that we can absorb that and understand it so that we can, again, be prepared to get our fair share or more than our fair share for the Dallas-Fort Worth area. I think some of the big other areas, at least in the transportation and the air quality world that we look at, have to do with freight. There's the Dallas-Fort Worth area is such an economic engine for the entire state. There's so much economic activity, and that is generally moved through a lot of large, heavy diesel-powered vehicles and equipment. And transitioning off of that diesel is one of the most important things that we can do for our air quality situation. It's also very important for human health, public health, communities that live adjacent to some of these large cargo facilities, the noise, the pollution, all of those things that they're exposed to. So there's a soundbite that I've heard that I'm interested to see how it's going to play out in the real world, because none of us have the crystal ball, but batteries will replace gasoline, hydrogen fuel cells will replace diesel. So some of these really heavy freight applications that may be difficult to electrify may be a really great opportunity for hydrogen to enable electrification. It's still an electric drivetrain or powertrain, but with a different fuel source that has a little bit different type of power density. So there's money from the Department of Energy to create hydrogen hubs. There's a lot of conversation in Texas about how the Texas Gulf Coast may play into that. And for us as a neighboring urban area, how could we be connected to that activity? And there are several programs that are there to help electrify ports and reduce truck emissions at ports. So we're eager to see how a port becomes defined. Is that simply a seaport, or could airports and other inland ports be eligible as well? So those are some of the things that we'll be keeping our eye on over the next few months as details unfold.
Thanks. Yeah, there's a lot to consider here. All of it, hopefully, is going to really help clean up our air and reduce emissions. Quick follow-up that's related to electric vehicles. One of the concerns raised around electric vehicles is the potential strain that it could provide on our electric grid, with people charging and just more demand for electricity through electric vehicles. How are utilities and other policymakers thinking about that issue?
Is that one for me?
Yeah, sorry, Lori.
I'll take a stab there. So the number one most important thing is planning ahead. And then that's on the utility side. And most of our region is in the deregulated market. And that poses a whole set of circumstances that are unique to Texas that in many other many other states, utilities are playing XYZ role, and that just simply doesn't translate 100%. So making sure that everybody understands the constraints that are related to the market is one very important piece. I will say Oncor has been very proactive in building out a lot of planning tools and being ready. But for everybody who's acquiring an electric vehicle, it's very important for us to understand this is another very large electric appliance. If I'm a consumer, I have a plug-in hybrid electric vehicle myself. I should not get home and plug it into the wall and let it start charging as soon as I get home in the afternoon on a hot summer day. Just like we're not supposed to run our dishwashers or our washing machines. We're supposed to try to do those things off peak, right? Avoid those hours from 3 to 7 p.m. We need to think about our electric cars the same way. And so if we just instill that thought process and that consumer behavior from the get-go, I think we'll be in a really good position. There's a lot of capacity in the Texas grid overnight. And to a certain degree in certain troughs in kind of mid-morning. So it's really about managing the charging and managing that charging behavior. And there are ways to do that through technology that's built into the chargers and into the vehicles, but also just making sure that we build those habits as consumers.
Yeah, I own a 2016 electric vehicle, and even one that ancient has the ability to program when the charging occurs. So I can program it to charge for a few hours at night, and it's real simple and easy to do. So I anticipate that all of these things will be worked out pretty smoothly as we go through this evolution here with electric vehicles. Congressman, I wanted to get back to you before we run out of time. What can we do as, either advocates or, related to the policy in supporting you and other policymakers on both the infrastructure bill, but just in general on promoting and increasing our transition to a cleaner economy?
Well, that's a great question, and I do just want to add, Lori's absolutely right about Texas's grid being, separate, but we did have $65 billion in the infrastructure bill to fund the transition to clean energy transmission and to improve our electric grids across the country. So, we recognize that we need that investment as well. Texas, of course, is a little bit different, and we recognize that, and we all learned all about that during the storm last year. But this is one of the largest investments. I think the largest investment ever in upgrading our energy system, transmission, storage, all of those things that we've been talking about, and resiliency as well. So, and expansion of renewable energy. So that's all really important. So back to your question, though, number one, I think we need to talk about what we have done and the wins that we've created. I know just in general, folks who are working this field, we often think about things that we haven't done yet. But we need to recognize some things that have been done. And as I said, this bill, which is sold in terms of the infrastructure, also is one of, if not the largest investment we've ever made, in transitioning to renewable energy sources and transitioning to a cleaner transportation system. And so we should celebrate that, and then we have to follow the implementation of it. And that's really the next step. Lori has a more direct role in that in some ways than I do, being on the COG. In terms of that, at the federal level, we can create these programs, we can create the funding, we can create the grant programs, we can give the administration the ability to hand this money out. It's then up to communities to take advantage of drawing it down and applying it correctly. And I think we've got a great North Texas COG here that I think does a lot of good work. And I think Lori and her colleagues there will do a good job with that. But all of us as citizens have a role to play in making sure that our cities and our communities take advantage of this funding. And I've said this in many different contexts, but I think the communities that best take advantage of this bill's funding will be the ones that lead the next decades coming up in this country, because this is not an investment that's going to come around very often. The size of it, the scope of it, Lori's right. It's probably so much that it's going to take years for local communities to work through just what is actually available to them, because it is so many things all at once. And there's a lot of discretion that's been given to some of our agencies to create new programs that, particularly for DOT and DOE, that I think will allow them to form, grant programs that'll be really exciting. So we have to stay on top of that. And then, of course, we have to stay involved in our democratic process. And that's, the thing that I think is, kind of where this all ends up, is that this was only possible because we were able to, elect people to positions who are willing to pursue a bill like this and do it in a way that is a green approach. And so that's really been done with the narrowest majorities in the Senate, the narrowest majorities we can have in the House. And this is not, this is a bipartisan bill. We had 19 Republican senators in the Senate vote for it. We had some votes, I think, in the House on the Republican side, but not many. But the idea, though, is that if you want to see this happening, then whether it's at the state, local, or federal level, then we have to have policymakers in place who will be willing to do this, be willing to find areas of common ground, and can then turn these ideas into law. Because having theoretical conversations about what we would like to do about the ideas that we would love to see implemented is not going to change anything. We need to have serious governmental investment in these transitions, and that's exactly what this is. So everybody who worked so hard in North Texas in 2018 and 2020 and turned out to vote, this is the result of your work. And now we have to keep going because we also know that there are folks who don't want to go in this direction, and we have to recognize that. So I'm not going to get into campaigning mode. I'm just saying being involved in your democracy will never ever be something that I think you'll regret. President Obama used to always tell us that democracy is not a spectator sport. It's something that you have to be involved with, and that's at every level of government, local, state, and federal, to make sure that we can work in conjunction to create these programs, implement them, and change lives. And that's ultimately what I think this bill is going to do. And if we take advantage of it, I think it's going to set North Texas and the state of Texas on a really good path going forward. We have a lot of potential here, as you said, Colin, to lead in some really new areas and exciting ways. This bill can be a big part of that. There's still more to do. There's still more to be done. But I think this is a great start.
Thanks so much. Those are great words to end our short visit today. I want to thank both Lori and Congressman Allred for their time and their thoughts here today. Really enjoyed this conversation, and I hope everyone else did as well. So thanks so much to everybody.
Thanks for having me.